everybody, it's Annabelle and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at some orchids that are currently in bloom. Now this isn't going to be all of them, just because at the moment I've got several of one kind of category of orchids that are blooming and a few kind of odd ones, and I've got a lot more starting to open buds up, so I thought I'd do this in like a two-part series so that this video isn't too long. So stay tuned for part 2, and if you do want to see part 2 by the time you finish watching this, make sure you are subscribed and hit the notifications so that you don't miss a video. So to start off with, I wanted to show you the Cycnodes Jumbo Puff, which I have talked about before, but I absolutely adore. It blooms around this time of year for me consistently, and this is the second blooming that I've had from it. It bloomed just after I got it last year also around this time. It has a wonderful strong artificial banana fragrance. The artificial banana fragrance is very common to Cycnodes species, and I've also had the Cycnodes lemani in bloom, which smelled very similar, very strong, powerful artificial banana scent. If you are very sensitive to fragrances though, do be careful with this one as it may be a little bit overpowering for you. I, however, love artificial banana fragrance, so it's all good. I love this plant. These flowers are long lasting. I seem to remember them lasting over a month last time. We'll have to see how they go this time. This orchid is actually unusual in that, being a hybrid between Cycnodes and Mormodes, it tends to be easier than either species parent. So both Cycnodes and Mormodes can be a little bit tricky, and particularly Cycnodes species can be difficult to grow in clumps, so they tend to only keep 1 or 2 pseudobulbs in cultivation, and this one seems to be a little bit better for that, although it is actually starting to lose this third back bulb, which I was going to take off and give to a friend. So we'll have to see how it goes, because it's losing that one now and I'm not totally comfortable with dividing it up just yet. Once it's finished blooming, I will take it out of the pot, have a look at it and see what I think. So as mentioned, this orchid is part of the Catacetinae family of orchids, which is a family of orchids that is very heavily seasonal dependent and go through a lot of seasonal growth habits, and then towards the end of their growth season they will enter a dormancy which will last over the winter period, and then in spring a new growth will resume. During the dormant period they may or may not drop their leaves depending on your climate, and they may or may not require watering through the dormancy depending on your climate. Obviously in nature many of them would still have a dew point depending on the family of Catacetinae that you're growing, so this can really vary between different species in the Catasetum and Catasetum allied species. So I would just say, if your orchid's shriveling up, give it a little bit of water. Obviously you also have to be careful with rot. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the care of these orchids, but I do give mine water throughout winter if I notice any bulbs shriveling, and what I've noticed about this is that the roots carry on growing through the winter season if I do that. So for me it works. I'm not saying it's a way to grow them or that it'll work for everybody, but this is how I'm growing them, just monitoring what the orchid's telling me. If it shrivels, I give it a bit of water. Obviously dropping leaves means that they're dropping the main collection of stomata on the plant, which is where the plant would lose water through a process known as transpiration, which is the movement of water through the plant, up through the roots, through the plant, delivering water and nutrients around the plant, and then lost through the leaves, which creates a pressure gradient that allows more water to be taken up. When the leaves are dropped, many of the stomata are lost, so there's going to be less water loss. There's also going to be less chlorophyll pigments, so less metabolism going on. Along with that, you've got winter temperatures and sun is going to be less, so overall the plant is going to be less metabolically active. But that's not to say that it's completely dormant. It will still be operating at a basic low level, so I don't see any need to be taking these and putting them under a bed or anything. I just listen to the plant, and my roots keep growing through winter for most of my Catasetum family, so that's what I go by, and if the plant's shriveling I give it a bit of water. Anyway, on this occasion the Cycnodes Jumbo Puff has a total of 6 flowers, which is by no means the most that they can produce. They can produce bigger and better displays, but I'm just getting to grips with Catacetinae, and I think that this is doing relatively well. So we'll just have to see whether next year it can produce more flowers. Next, we're going to kick off the Rhynchostylis category with the Rhynchostylis gigantea cartoon variety. Rhynchostylis gigantea comes in many different varieties and colour forms, but they all have the same fragrance, to my nose at least. The fragrance of these is particularly divisive, so if you have a sensitive nose, I would definitely recommend trying to smell before you buy. If you can get to orchid shows, I know obviously at the moment that's not a thing, and for me personally, it's not a thing that I'm interested in really, but if you can get to an orchid show, then it would probably be better to smell this one before you spend your money on it if you are very sensitive to fragrance. Just because it is an extremely strong fragrance. Now, some people describe this as a wonderful lemony, spicy fragrance, and some detect an undertone to it, and whether or not you detect this undertone is probably genetic. It's an interesting thought and interesting concept, and I will get onto that in a bit more detail with the other varieties. Next up, we have the beautiful, beautiful Perreiraara, or what used to be Rhynchoryda's Bangkok Sunset. This is a hybrid between Orchids flabellata, Rhynchostylis celestis, and Orchids holluchiana. Now, Orchids holluchiana I've had in bloom before and has a wonderful, wonderful lemonade type fragrance, and to me this hybrid actually smells pretty identical to that. I haven't had them in bloom at the same time, there are probably some subtle differences, but to me it's a very sweet, kind of sharp, lemony fragrance, like fresh lemonade. If you've ever made fresh lemonade with lots of sugar and fresh lemon juice and lemon rind, there was one that I used to make when I was younger, like making a lemon syrup with the lemon rind, and it reminds me exactly of that, or candied lemon peel, or something very, very sharp and strong and lemony, but also sweet. I absolutely love it, and I don't think this one could be described as offensive in any way, unlike the Rhynchostylis gigantea, where the citrus comes with a nasty undertone. This one doesn't have that kind of undertone, it's just beautiful. So to me this smells like Orchids holluchiana, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. Now, something interesting about my particular hybrid, if you may have noticed, if you've seen Miss Orchid Girl or other people's Perreiraara Bangkok Sunset, mine seems to be an alba form, or alba-ish. There's basically no pink or orange. It's yellow and white with a little tint of pink on the lip. Now, I have seen reference to this being a colour variable in the fact that it seems to depend on heat and light to some extent from the more orangey pink tones, but I don't think that this particular orchid is ever going to produce that vibrant pink and orange flower that we've seen on others, unfortunately. And I've had this one in pretty bright light. When it first started its buds, I actually moved it into the lounge and put it directly under a very strong grow light. So I really don't think that it's had not enough light. It's obviously got enough light that the anthocyanins have come up on the leaves pretty strongly. I think that this is possibly just the colour form that I've got. It's fine. I do have another one that I bought from Equigenera, so hopefully that one gives me the more pink-orange sunset coloured flowers that I was after. Now, I have no way to know, but if I was to speculate, looking at the blooms, their shape, display and the overall plant structure, I would say that the ID of my plant is correct, that it is in fact the Perreiraara Bangkok Sunset. What I would potentially think could have happened, and I have no way to know for sure, is that an alba form of the Orchids holluchiana was potentially used in this. Now, the Orchids holluchiana can be colour variable, and there are alba forms which look very similar in coloration to this. However, the bloom shape of this is very inspired by the Rhynchostylis celestis, so potentially, I guess as well, it could be influenced from the Rhynchostylis celestis side, that there could be an alba form that was used in the Thai Noir parent, but we will never know. Now, interestingly, this is given a clonal name on the label, so the name is Perreiraara Bangkok Sunset, and then in commas it has fragrance variety. So usually when they have like a variety after the name, it indicates that they're a clonal name. So I would be interested to hear what you guys think, and if you've got any experience with the fragrance variety, or if this is something that the nursery has made up, which is also quite possible. It's beautiful, nonetheless, it is beautiful. Not quite what I was anticipating, but still I think it's absolutely stunning, and it's got a wonderful kind of honey golden coloration. There is also, I've seen reference to a Perreiraara Bangkok Sunset honeybee or honey something variety. It might be worth noting that there seem to be some different cultivars out there. And again, I'm speculating a little bit here based on some basic knowledge that I've got of the parents and the potential maybe that there is some colour variability. But anyway, I think I've speculated enough for this particular orchid, but it's beautiful, wonderful, wonderful, sharp, sweet, lemony fragrance that I absolutely adore, and I'd recommend it to anybody, and it seems to be relatively easy to grow. Next up, we're going to talk about my Rhynchostylis gigantea, and this time the red colour variety. Now again, this has citrus fragrance with strong musky undertones. I've done sniff tests on all of my varieties side by side in a set environment, in set conditions, so on the same windowsill and grown in the same environment, under the same light conditions, with the same temperatures, and they all smell identical to me. I can't detect a difference. Whether or not you detect a difference or not though, all of our noses are different, all of our fragrance backgrounds are different, all of our reference points are kind of a little bit different, I think, as well. In addition to this, we are all very different as humans, and I will link down below an article on how genetic differences can affect how we each personally experience fragrance. It's an extremely complex subject and not something I want to get too involved into, but I think it's worth appreciating that we are all different, and we all have these different genetic combinations of these different fragrance receptors that can mean that while one person smells something and smells a floral fragrance, somebody else smells something and doesn't smell that at all. So I will link that article down below. It's an interesting read if you are into the subject area. So this is the red colour form of the Rhynchostylis gigantea. And moving on to the peach colour form of the Rhynchostylis gigantea, which is the first time blooming for me. I've actually got two of these. One I bought as a young plant, and then I bought a more mature plant a couple of years ago, I believe now. So the peach again has the same fragrance. The strength of this is a little bit less, but if I go up close and smell the individual flower, the fragrance is the same and the strength is the same. I think the fragrances it's putting out is less because obviously it has less flowers than the other ones. It's a beautiful, beautiful peachy colour with a really cute blush of green at the centre, which I just think is so beautiful. So fragrance is such a personal thing, so I wouldn't want to put anyone off by saying that I personally don't love this fragrance in some conditions. However, I would like to say that since moving house, my blooming last year and the year before and the year before that, I think, was all on the same windowsill in my old house, and I almost couldn't bear the fragrance. We had to shut the doors while my Rhynchostylis giganteas were in bloom so that they were shut off in their little room because it was almost unbearable to me. And I have talked about this fragrance quite a lot, but it's got a very strong undertone that's a bit unpleasant. However, moving them over to the new house, they're in warmer temperatures rather than in a colder bedroom but on a heat mat at the last house, and lower light conditions, and I'm getting more of the lemony and fragrance and less of that nasty musky undertone through. So it could also be culture dependent. I think there's so many factors to fragrance that we can't necessarily generalize between people. So this is just my opinion. If you have kind of similar nose to me and we detect things in a similar way, then maybe you would detect it the same. I personally would love to hear from anybody who has Rhynchostylis gigantea and has smelled the fragrance. What do you smell and what are your conditions? How are you growing it? And maybe if you could put another reference point, like for example, if you know what the Oncidium sherry baby smells like, or Encyclia cordigera, if you could put what you think those smell like, maybe we could get a bit of a nose profile on the Rhynchostylis gigantea. Maybe that would help people decide whether they're likely to detect things in a similar way. I don't know. I would be interested to hear anyway. Even if we can't do anything with the data, I think it would be interesting. I personally wouldn't be put off by the fragrance because even when I've hated this fragrance, I love the plant. It's the most rewarding orchid species that I have. The growth pattern, how easily they grow potted, how chunky and chubby and succulent the leaves are, I think is wonderful. Next up, a relative of the Rhynchostylis gigantea, we've got its baby, the Holcostylis MS Sunlight, which is Holcoglossum flavescens crossed with Rhynchostylis gigantea. The Holcoglossum flavescens gives it a wonderful narrow leaf form because the Holcoglossum has a terate-shaped leaf, so long vine-like leaves, whereas the Rhynchostylis gigantea has that thick, succulent, fat leaf. So combined, we have this really beautiful plant form, which is compact and chubby and chunky, and I just love it. This is the first time blooming for me, and it has a wonderful, sharp, sweet lemon fragrance, and it doesn't seem to contain the undertones that Rhynchostylis gigantea has, at least for me. So for me, this is almost closer to the Perreiraara Bangkok Sunset or the Orchid schilleriana in fragrance, but a little bit sharper, but without the musky kind of undertones. So I think that this is a really beautiful fragrance and a really beautiful plant, and I would thoroughly recommend it to anybody who is interested in growing kind of Vandaceous types, but maybe doesn't have so much space and wants something a bit more compact, because this does provide a really nice, beautiful leaf form, compact plant. And for me, it's been a little bit tricky to bloom, but this is the first time blooming, so it could just be that the plant was trying to bloom too soon. I don't know. It's been a bit of a tricky one, and it's needed repotting for me quite frequently because the root growth has been very good, and it's needed uppotting quite frequently, and I've always seemed to time that with when it's developing a spike, so I also could have been the problem here, not just the plant, could have also been me. I think it's always worth acknowledging that often we are the problem rather than the plants, and just looking at what we're doing that could be affecting the way the plants are responding. That's certainly true for me, at least. I often do things and then the plants respond not so well, and I think, well, if I hadn't done that, maybe that plant wouldn't have responded in that way, or it could also be a plant thing. It's difficult to know. So I think that this is a fantastic little plant for anyone who wants a compact, highly fragrant, Vandaceous type with some of the Rhynchostylis gigantea traits without the potentially divisive fragrance. Just to go a little bit more into depth on the background for this particular hybrid, which may help to explain why I've had spikes blasting before, and since the move I've now got a full flower spike with buds. So just a thought, so I think we should maybe go a bit into more detail on that. The Rhynchostylis gigantea, and I've talked about this loads before, and you guys are probably sick of hearing about Rhynchostylis gigantea on this channel. It's a warm to hot growing epiphyte, but they like a lot of moisture with that, so they're distinct from a typical Vandaceous, how you treat a Vanda. I would treat them almost more like a Phalaenopsis, to be perfectly honest. And they really like a lot of moisture, they really like a lot of heat, they're native to places really hot and humid all the time. The Holcoglossum flavescens is actually a cool growing epiphyte, so it grows in high elevations in China, and it experiences quite low temperatures compared to the Rhynchostylis gigantea. So you have a warm to hot grower, and then combined with a cold grower. So it could potentially be that this orchid is more on the intermediate, low end of the intermediate temperature scale, and that it does prefer maybe some slight night temperature drops or some slight seasonal variations, and that maybe this is what has contributed to me finally getting a bloom spike, not the constant repottings. It could be both though, it could be a mixture of the two. So I thought it was just worth going a little bit into detail on that to try and possibly add another layer to my explanation as to why this is blooming, just in case anyone else is growing warm to hot as I was growing before and is struggling with similar kind of problems. This could be completely irrelevant though, just thought I'd throw that out there. It's a wonderful little plant, and I would really, really recommend it to anybody. Lovely little fragrant flowers that are super cute, small compact plant, wonderful, wonderful form to the plant, wonderful structure. For me, it grows relatively fast, certainly faster than Rhynchostylis gigantea. I will pop a picture up on screen of a couple of years ago, the plant that I got, which was quite a small plant, and you can see the kind of growth progression. I'll also put a date up on screen. This is a handy thing about taking pictures and putting them on Instagram. Even if I can't film, I have a date reference for what a plant looked like at a certain date, and I can show you guys and you can judge growth progression based on that, which provides a really good record for us, I think. So I think I've talked enough about this little orchid. It's a wonderful plant. I'd highly recommend it. If you see it and you think you could give it the right care, I would definitely go for it because it's cute, it's compact, it's fragrant, and it's easy to care for and grow in my experience, having grown it in a variety of environments and temperatures. So that is the Holcostylis MS Sunlight, a hybrid between Rhynchostylis gigantea and Holcoglossum flavescens. Next, I'm going to briefly show you the first ever blooming of my Phalaenopsis orchid world, Bonnie Vasqeuz. I got this as a seedling from Orchid Garden a couple of years ago, and it's been a very slow grower for me, a very slow burner. It's been okay in the root department. It's not like it's not grown well for me, it's just grown extremely slowly. This is the first blooming. I've only got one flower here, but it's every bit as magnificent as I hoped it would be. It's gorgeous, it's a beautiful flower, and this plant can actually do a lot better, and it can produce multiple flowers and much larger flowers, I believe. So I think that this, as a first blooming, isn't living up to the full potential of what this orchid can do, but it is a wonderful, wonderful hybrid. And if you can get a bigger plant, then I would, because it is a slow grower, and this has been a slow journey for me, but I'm so happy to have my first blooming from it. It's got a wonderful fragrance, which is citrusy and orangey, and it's lovely, and I actually almost think it's better than the Phalaenopsis bellina. It's a bit stronger, a little bit more kind of citrusy, quite sweet. In some ways it almost reminds me of peaches in some notes, but not peaches. It's like a fruit salad, a fruit cocktail. It's lovely and I love it, and I can't wait for getting more flowers and bigger flowers on the next show. Next, I'm just going to show you briefly my Phalaenopsis schilleriana, which is blooming out. This is a perfect Phalaenopsis in a mix of a foliage phal with a beautiful bloomer and producing fragrant blooms. Now, unfortunately, I'm only getting a very light kind of soft powdery fragrance from this, which is more than I got last time it bloomed. So I think that we're maybe getting there. And I have heard reports that some schilleriana kind of don't release much fragrance in the first few weeks of opening, and then it gets stronger, so I will keep an eye on that and keep sniffing. It did have 3 more flowers, which I tried to pollinate with Rhynchostylis gigantea, which failed, so I have ruined the display a little bit, but imagine the hybrid. If that had worked, it would have been amazing. It didn't work, so I've just lost 3 flowers, but we've got the rest, and if you don't try something, then you'll never know. So I'll probably keep trying, to be perfectly honest, but I will leave these open a bit longer so I can enjoy the display and see if I can experience a stronger fragrance from this. It's not unusual at all for schilleriana to branch out from a spike, so it'll produce an initial spike and then it'll branch out multiple times. It's a wonderful species and I'd highly recommend it. Beautiful foliage phal. Speaking of the best of both worlds in terms of foliage and fragrance, we have Paphiopedilum delenatii, one of my favourite paphs. Beautiful mottled lace-like foliage with a fragrant flower, which is a little unusual for paphs, and there tend to be a few groups that are fragrant within the Paphiopedilum. Fragrance tends to be quite soft and fruity as far as I can tell, so this one smells like raspberry yogurt to me, like a very soft, creamy raspberry flavour. And I've actually got 2 of these plants because I love them so much, and my other one is slightly more fragrant than this one, and that isn't unusual, unfortunately. I think that the fragrance can be a little bit variable with the Paphiopedilum delenatii and with other fragrant paphs, so it could also be some people can detect it more than others, but I do have 2 plants and one produces a much stronger fragrance than the other, and this is the one that produces the weaker fragrance. I still get a soft creamy raspberry flavour from it though. Wonderful foliage, and it does tend to self-pollinate, so I believe this one has also self-pollinated. It's got a slight swelling behind the flower, which is getting bigger. My Paphiopedilums seem to always leave themselves with a seed pod after they've flowered. I absolutely love the bubblegum lip of the delenatii and similar Paphiopedilums, as opposed to the kind of giant domed lip. The kind of soft, fluffy bubblegum lip I think is beautiful. So that is Paphiopedilum delenatii. And now for the final orchid of my What's in Bloom video today. I know I've talked a lot about these orchids so far, but this is the Encyclia cordigera, which is amazing, and anyone who's followed my channel will probably have seen me talking about this orchid before, because I've had it a long time and been waiting for it to bloom for a long time. And it was obviously just saving up its energy for a fantastic bloom display as a specimen plant with 3 spikes. It's a wonderful plant and I love it for the big, round, shiny, juicy pseudobulbs that it has anyway. And the fragrance is quite famous actually. It's reported to be kind of a cocoa chocolate fragrance by some. Now, I've left this a good while before I've recorded this, so more flowers have opened since, and I've left it a few weeks to be able to report back to you fully on the fragrance, because the fragrance that's produced can change over the next days or weeks after a flower is first opened. So the first few days you're likely to not get much of a fragrance from any orchid, and then it'll kind of start to build as the flower has been open longer. So I really wanted to get a good fragrance profile on this, is my point. And I don't detect any chocolate or cocoa or any kind of vanilla, cocoa-y, dark chocolate, anything fragrance from it. I kind of detect a kind of fruity hyacinth-like fragrance, I think is the best way I could describe it. It's very strong and it's lovely, and it's the first thing you notice when you come into the room. It's wonderful, but I just don't get any cocoa or chocolate or anything of the sort from it. So we're all different, we all detect fragrance differently. I personally get kind of fruity hyacinths from this, but that's a wonderful fragrance, don't get me wrong, and I love it. So I love the fat bulbs on this, I love the fragrance, I love that it made me 3 spikes and quite a lot of flowers, and I've got this really strong fragrance. The flowers so far have been open about 3 weeks now, and no signs of fading. So yeah, at the time of recording, obviously not all the flowers are open. I'm doing this as like a voiceover because I wanted to be able to report back with the full fragrance. But I also didn't want to miss the flowers because I didn't know how long they were going to last. So I filmed this earlier as they were starting to been open a couple of weeks. So yeah, I love this orchid. I think it's wonderful. I'd highly recommend it to everybody, but I would just say I don't get any chocolate from it, but that's cool. It's a beautiful fragrance anyway. I just can only give you what I can smell from it in my conditions with my nose, and I love the fragrance. I think it's wonderful, and I love the bulbs. I love the plant. It's easy to grow. It likes a lot of moisture compared to a typical cattleya type care that is often described for Encyclias. I think in general Encyclias do like a lot more moisture, and for me it does fantastic in self-watering with a mixture of pumice, leca and synthic running through. So it's a really kind of moisture retentive mix, and it produces really big fat bulbs that actually unfortunately do tend to split. I guess they just get too fat for their own good. I do notice that in some of the fatter bulbs I end up with little splits that do luckily dry out, but I do have to keep an eye on them because I'm very wary of rot or infection. So my particular Encyclia cordigera, as you can see, has a wonderful pinkish lip. Now the colour and shape can be a little bit variable on cordigera. When mine first opened, it was producing more of a star shape, and then the petals and sepals have kind of curled back a bit into this more, how to describe it, curved flower shape, cupped flower, I guess. The lip itself has a wonderful pink saturation, fading out to a beautiful kind of lavendery baby pink, and it is a beautiful plant. So that is my Encyclia cordigera. And that finishes my What's in Bloom video part 1 for this month. Stay tuned for part 2, which will involve some epidendrums that are budding, some cattleyas, and some other little exciting things that I've got happening, which are basically ready to show you. Just need to wait a little bit longer for a couple more buds, I think. I had a request from Michael McCarthy to put together a little family portrait of my Rhynchostylis giganteas. Unfortunately, my cartoon has just finished blooming now, so they haven't quite married up for the timings, but these are my Rhynchostylis gigantea peach, red and spots, and my Holcostylis flavescens crossed with Rhynchostylis gigantea with It's also called Holcostylis MS Sunlight. So this is a little family group movie of them together. Hope that you enjoyed this video today, and if you did, don't forget to give it a like, it really helps me out, or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates or part 2 of the What's in Bloom. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I had a couple of requests to bring back the kind of taking the orchids off the shelves and looking at them in more detail, so I hope that this video has been enjoyable for you, not too long, and I will see you guys all next time. Hope you're all keeping well and staying safe and healthy. See you guys all later. Bye!